Welcome to the Family Bible Journey. Every time you listen, you are a blessing and encouragement to us as we seek to leave the legacy of faith as we journey and journal through the Bible. So thanks for listening. This is episode 275, season 1 of the Family Bible Journey Old Testament podcast. Today we're looking at Esther chapter 8. The title of today's podcast is Relief for the Jews. And our key verses for today are chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, verses 7 and 8, and verses 10 and 11, where we read, On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Verses 7 and 8. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Verses 10 and 11. And Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letter by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. This is the word of the Lord. So now that Haman has been deposed, and Mordecai has been established as his replacement, King Ahasuerus gives Mordecai and Esther all of his power and authority to make a different decree, a new one, not in place of the one that Haman had written and sealed, because all of these edicts, according to Persian law, were immutable. They could not be removed. They could not be changed. So instead, they wrote another edict giving the Jewish people the king's blessing to protect themselves, their wives, and their children, and to attack those who were intent on destroying them. And this is a complete reversal for the Jewish people. And we learn in this episode many lessons about faithfulness, about God's timing, and about using our God-given gifts of wisdom to accomplish His purposes, to be smart in how we conduct our affairs. And I have a couple of notes here on this chapter 8 that I want to share with those who are journaling with us through the Bible. My note on chapter 8, verse 8, it says the old edict could not be revoked, but a new edict would rectify the situation. On verse 10, it says haste was added to this edict. It went out as a special delivery. And as we see how the edict was delivered, Haman had sent it out through all of the normal royal channels. But here, this edict, we are told, was carried by swift steeds, bred from the royal stud. In other words, the king put his own personal couriers to work in delivering this edict. And think of it like an ancient pony express. The king is using the fastest and best technology of the time to make sure that this edict was heard throughout the nations as quickly as possible. And then what we see happening towards the end of this chapter, in verse 17, is that many people of other nations and other ethnicities, in seeing that the Jewish people were now the king's favored people, joined themselves to the Jewish nation. And this is quite remarkable, because throughout human history, we see many episodes where the people are persecuting and exterminating the Jews. And this is one of the few places where we're going to see people willingly and gladly joining up for the Jewish cause and trying to become a part of the Jewish people. And we're going to see echoes of this. Actually, we already have heard echoes of this because when the exiles were allowed to return with Ezra and Nehemiah, there were many of the exiles that were people who had joined themselves to the Jews with this turn of events. And they were allowed to be a part of the Jewish nation, but they were not allowed to hold positions of the priestly order or in the Levitical order, as those were reserved for the Jewish people alone. And so here, even though Esther is arranged chronologically after Ezra and Nehemiah, we are given a little nugget at the tail end of this chapter where there's people are joining themselves to the Jewish people that helps us understand this difficulty that Ezra in particular had to deal with when the exiles were allowed to return back to Jerusalem in Judah. And so this chapter 8, it is a tremendous victory for the Jewish people, and hope arises in the place of their sadness, not because the king was going to fight their battles for them, but simply because they have been given permission to defend themselves. They are now going to be in a position to take care of their families, protect their loved ones, and have the very same powers that just a few days earlier threatened their very existence, put at their disposal to ensure the prosperity and the protection of the Jewish people. A big thank you to all of you whose financial support makes this podcast work. As many of our listeners know, I receive zero compensation for this podcast. However, as the podcast has now grown to touch people in over 40 states and over 24 countries, it has become very helpful to have a trusty assistant in the form of a college intern to edit and produce the podcasts for us. So if you would like to see even more of the Family Bible Journey or podcasts like it, please go to the website, familybiblejourney.com, where you can make a tax-deductible contribution to our work and bless others as we share this journey of journaling through the Bible together. Our blessing for today. May God grant you wisdom to turn and rely on Him during most trying times, and faith to see Him work things out for your good. Amen.